"Do you regret wedding your husband?" The host thought he had her trapped, but Usha Vance's response left him floundering in front of millions. The cameras were rolling, the lights blazing, and the tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a dagger. The host, a well-known liberal commentator, sat erect in his chair, a smirk creeping onto his face as he shuffled his papers. He had done this countless times. Before lured a guest in, made them comfortable, then blindsided them with a question designed to put them on the defensive. Usha Vance, however, was no ordinary guest. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blazer, she exuded the kind of quiet confidence that made people sit up and take note. A Yale-educated attorney with an air of composed wisdom, she had navigated far tougher situations than a live television discussion. But tonight was different. The interview had been moving along predictably, talks about politics, her legal career, and of course, her husband, Senator J.D. Vance. Then the host leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. As he tilted his head slightly, his tone was casual, but there was a distinct sharpness to it. "Do you ever regret marrying J.D. Vance?" The question landed like a stone in the middle of the conversation. The air shifted. There was no mistaking what had just happened. It wasn't curiosity, it was a snare. A calculated move meant to either bait her into saying something that could be used against her, or to put her in the awkward position of defending her own union. A few audience members gasped quietly. Some leaned forward in expectation, sensing the moment was about to take a sharp turn. The studio crew knew they had something. Even the camera operators instinctively adjusted their focus, ready to capture whatever was coming next. The host, a man who had made a career out of catching guests off guard, barely hid his delight. He had phrased the question just right, innocent enough to seem like a casual inquiry, yet laced with enough poison to force a reaction. He had seen other politicians, spouses fumble on similar questions, a stumble, a moment of hesitation, an awkward laugh. Any of these would do. But Usha didn't stumble, she didn't fumble, and she certainly didn't laugh awkwardly. Instead, she let the question linger. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She could feel the host watching her closely, waiting for some sign that she had been thrown off balance. But all he got was a slow, measured smile. A beat passed, then another. The smirk on the host's face faltered just slightly, but he wasn't ready for what was coming next. The host sat back slightly, his smirk now tempered with something else, curiosity, maybe even the beginnings of uncertainty. He had expected Usha to react quickly, to rush into an answer that he could pick apart. But she didn't. She just sat there, composed, calm, undaunted. The silence grew heavier by the second. The audience wasn't sure whether to shift in their seats or hold their breath. Live television had a way of making even the smallest pause feel like an eternity. And right now, everyone in that studio knew something was about to happen. Finally, Usha took a slow inhale. She glanced at the host, not with rage, not with unease, but with something more unsettling to him. Entertainment. Regret. She repeated, as if she had just been asked whether she regretted having morning meal that day. Her voice was steady, carrying no hint of uncertainty. The host blinked, his fingers quivering slightly on his desk. He had expected her to go into a protective mode, maybe laugh nervously, maybe even try to dodge the question. Instead, she was taking her time, playing it as if she were the one in command. She crossed one leg over the other, adjusting slightly in her chair, before speaking again. "You know," she said, tilting her head just enough to make it clear she was about to turn the situation. "I always find these kinds of questions intriguing." There was something deliberate about her choice of words. She wasn't just answering, she was making a declaration. The host opened his mouth slightly, maybe to interrupt, but she wasn't done. "I mean, I could sit here and list the reasons why I admire and respect my husband, the values we share, the way he stood by me, and the way we've built a life together." She paused, then smiled again, her voice unwavering. "But somehow, I don't think that's the answer you're looking for, is it?" The host's expression shifted just for a second, but the camera caught it, that tiny change in his demeanor. He had walked into this moment expecting to lead the conversation, yet somehow he was no longer in control of it. The audience could feel it. He shifted in his chair. "Well, I was just curious, were you?" She cut in smoothly, still holding that same composed expression. "Because, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've ever heard a male politician's wife face this question on live television." A murmur rippled through the audience. A few heads turned, a few eyebrows raised. The host blinked again. "I mean," Usha didn't let him finish. "It's interesting, isn't it?" She continued, her tone still light, almost conversational. "Women in politics, whether we're the ones in office or the ones married to the men who are so often asked if we lament the choices we've made. But I don't recall ever seeing a male guest sit here and get asked if he regrets standing by his wife." Now the audience was fully engaged. The host gave a tight smile, trying to regain his footing. "Well, I just thought, given some of his opinions," and Usha tilted her head slightly. "Ah, so that's what this is about." And just like that, she had flipped it. The host realized too late that he had lost control of the moment. but Usha was just getting started. The host tried to recover, clearing his throat as he shuffled the papers in front of him. However, he wasn't used to being on the defensive. Usha, on the other hand, looked completely at peace. She had no notes in front of her, no teleprompter feeding her lines, just her own confidence and a firm grasp of the situation. She leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "Let me ask you something," she said, her voice calm but pointed. "Would you ever ask Michelle Obama if she regretted marrying Barack?" A brief silence. The host's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The audience reacted instantly. A few quiet chuckles, a couple of murmurs. They knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just answering, she was exposing the prejudice hidden in the question itself. The host finally found his voice, though it lacked the confidence he had started with. "Well, I mean, that's not really the same, is it?" Usha interjected smoothly, raising an eyebrow. Because when a woman stands by a man whose opinions don't align perfectly with the mainstream media's narrative, suddenly, it's a debatable decision. But when it's the other way around, it's a romantic tale. Interesting. The audience was fully engaged now, watching the host struggle to reclaim control of the conversation. He forced a chuckle, trying to shrug it off. "I was just giving you the opportunity to speak for yourself. That's all." Usha didn't blink, and I appreciate that. Her voice carried no sarcasm, just an unsettling kind of candor. "But I also recognize when I'm being handed a loaded question." More murmurs. The host's grin was long gone now, and Usha wasn't done. She shifted in her seat, her body language making it clear she was completely comfortable while he was the one trying to find his balance. "I don't regret marrying my husband," she said, voice steady. "I'm pleased with the life we've built. I'm proud of his work, just like he's proud of mine. And if the question is, do I stand by him despite political differences, then let me turn that back on you." She let the pause sit just long enough. "Do you stand by every political stance your spouse has ever taken?" The host drew in a sharp breath. The change in his demeanor was subtle, but Usha caught it. "I mean, that's different," he said quickly. She tilted her head slightly. "How so?" No answer. The audience was watching him, waiting. Usha's smile was calculated, her tone unwavering. "Because if we're holding marriages to that benchmark, we'd have to scrutinize a lot of people, but we don't. We only do it when it serves a certain agenda." The host glanced toward his producers, as if searching for a way to redirect the conversation. But it was too late. The moment was hers now, and the audience sensed it. But what happened next was even worse for the host. The host let out a short breath, forcing a chuckle. "Well, I wasn't trying to imply." Usha didn't let him finish. "Oh, I know precisely what you were trying to do," she said, her voice still composed but sharp enough to make him shift in his chair. "It just didn't work." The audience burst into laughter, scattered applause, even a few whistles. The host, who had started this interview in full authority, was now struggling to steady himself. He glanced down at his notes, flipping through them as if searching for a new approach. But it didn't matter anymore. The opportunity had already slipped from his grasp. Usha leaned back, waiting. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. Finally, he looked up, offering another forced smile. "I just think that when someone's spouse has strong political opinions, people are naturally intrigued about how that influences the marriage." Usha nodded slowly. "Oh, absolutely. Just like people were curious about Bill and Hillary Clinton's marriage, when they disagreed on certain policies, or when John Kerry's wife spoke out against his campaign positions." "Oh wait," she let her voice trail off, as if pretending to think. "Nobody actually asked them those questions, did they?" More laughter from the audience. The host's grin was growing stiffer by the second. "Look," he said, his voice betraying his unease. "I was just asking a question. And I answered it," Usha replied smoothly. "The problem is, you didn't get the answer you were expecting." A collective ripple spread through the audience. A camera operator could be seen, suppressing a grin. The energy in the studio had shifted entirely. The host recognized it. He could try to move on, but it wouldn't matter. The damage was already done. The audience could feel it. This was the kind of moment that would be replayed and shared across social media, dissected on news panels, and turned into headlines by morning. And that's exactly what happened. By the time the interview aired in full, clips of Usha's response were already making the rounds online. Twitter was flooded with reactions. Some cheering her for exposing the host's narrative, others scrambling to spin the moment in his favor. Memes popped up. Screenshots of the host's stunned expression were splashed across political commentary pages. Even media analysts who typically disagreed with Usha's political affiliations admitted she had handled the moment with precision and grace. The network, acknowledging the impact of what had just unfolded, posted the exchange on their own YouTube channel, though they carefully edited the framing to make it seem like a fiery exchange rather than a clear humiliation. But it didn't matter. People had already seen the raw footage, and the consensus was overwhelming. Usha Vance had just delivered one of the most ruthlessly effective responses in recent political media history. And the host, well, his name was trending too, but not for the reasons he had hoped. But the ripple effect of this moment didn't stop at the interview. What happened next took things even further. The fallout was immediate. News outlets raced to respond, each spinning the moment in their own way. Conservative media hailed Usha's clapback as a masterclass in grace under pressure, calling it a moment that exposed the media's hypocrisy. Liberal commentators, on the other hand, tried to downplay the exchange, with some claiming the host's question had been misrepresented or that Usha had deflected instead of answering directly. But none of that mattered. The video was everywhere. Clips of her response flooded Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even TikTok. Someone set her most biting remarks to dramatic music, editing in slow-motion shots of the host blinking in stunned silence. Within 24 hours, the clip had millions of views. Political figures couldn't resist weighing in. Some Democrats avoided the subject altogether, unwilling to touch what was clearly a PR disaster for the host. Others tried damage control, suggesting the backlash was manufactured outrage by conservatives. Republicans, meanwhile, wasted no time turning the moment into a rallying cry. Prominent senators, commentators, and influencers praised Usha's response as the perfect rebuttal to media bias. But the most telling reaction came from ordinary viewers. The comment sections of news, sites, and social media platforms were flooded with people who weren't necessarily political, but had felt the bias firsthand. Women especially connected with EHS's point. This isn't about politics. I've had people question my choices like this just because I don't fit their expectations. Good for her for standing her ground. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get defensive. She just completely dismantled the guy. That's how it's done. I don't care what side you're on. If you're asking a woman if she regrets her marriage because her husband has his own opinions, that's just patronizing. And then came the think pieces. Journalists and opinion writers rushed to analyze why the clip resonated so profoundly. Some argued it was about marital loyalty in an era of political division. Others said it was a larger statement on how women are treated in media. A few tried to argue that Usha was using her legal training to manipulate the conversation. But that argument didn't gain much momentum because the truth was simple. She had been handed a leading question and had handled it flawlessly. And the network the hosts implore found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They had intended for this interview to be a simple segment, a routine discussion with a political spouse. Now it was a sensational moment that had spiraled out of their control. In a feeble attempt at damage control, the host released a statement insisting that the question had been fair and misunderstood, but no one was buying it. Because Usha hadn't just survived the interview, she had flipped the script entirely, and the conversation wasn't going away anytime soon. But beyond the headlines and social media reactions, there was a deeper lesson in all of this, one that mattered far more than the politics of the moment. As the media storm raged on, Usha Vance remained exactly as she had been in that interview. Calm, unbothered, and steadfast. She didn't chase the headlines. She didn't gloat or engage in online debates. She had said what she needed to say, and that was enough. But the impact of that moment went far beyond a viral clip. It touched something deeper, something far more profound than politics. People saw themselves in that exchange. It wasn't just about Usha Vance and the host. It was about how people, especially women, are constantly put in positions where they have to justify their choices. A woman builds a successful career, and she's asked if she regrets sacrificing family time. A woman chooses to stay home and raise her kids, and she's asked if she regrets not having a career. A woman marries a man with strong opinions, and suddenly, her marriage is something to be questioned. The double standard was impossible to ignore, and Usha hadn't just answered the question, she had unmasked it for what it really was. That was the real reason the clip had spread so fast. Not because it was scandalous or politically charged, but because it was a moment of truth, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response isn't shouting or arguing. It's simply refusing to play the game. She had taken control of the conversation, not by attacking, but by making people reflect. And that's a skill more powerful than any political talking point. In the end, the host's attempt to put her on the spot collapsed spectacularly. But this was never about him. It was about how we treat people when we think they owe us an explanation for their choices. And maybe, just maybe, it was a wake-up call. Because if there's one lesson to take from this, it's this. Confidence isn't about having the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let the truth speak for itself. Usha Vance didn't just win an interview, she reframed the conversation. And that's something no headline can take away. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe for more real, thought-provoking stories like this one. And let me know, have you ever been put in a situation where you had to defend your personal choices? Drop a comment below.